So, welcome to my workshop on focusing trauma on the autistic mind. Thanks for coming. This is my translator, Tony. First, who needs German translation? Anybody really need German translation? No. Okay.
I'm going to stay anyway.
Yeah, you're going to stay anyway. We were kind of hoping we could just kind of do like blah, 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 and then he's like, alles klar, and then, go on. So, even better. All right.
But if anyone has a question that's easier to formulate in German, I'll translate that into English for him, and then he can give another response.
Yeah, exactly. So, I want to get started with a little experiential exercise. Who's watched Star Trek IV? Star Trek IV. So the setup is that, spoiler alert, right? Spock dies at the end of Star Trek II. And then, come as close as you want, you're welcome to scoot in a little bit. And if for some reason this camera stops working, let me know. It should be running, okay? So in Star Trek III, he's basically spent the whole movie resurrecting him, okay? And then at the beginning of Star Trek IV, this is what happens. So here's the first experiential exercise. Take a second. Ask yourself gently, what came up for you when you saw this? Oh my God. Thank you. No problem. Just take it and sit in it. No problem. And when something comes, let me know. Yes?
So I'm realizing that what came up for me is what's happening right now when you ask what came up for you.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what to say because I'm flooded with possibilities and none feel quite right, so I'm in a disconnected place from being able to answer.
Okay. Disconnected.
Childhood experiences. I loved Spock.
Oh.
I always wanted to have these kind of ears.
Okay.
And I found him it was a very important figure in my childhood.
Okay.
Because he was a little bit strange and I idealized him a little bit.
Okay.
And I wanted to laugh now.
Yeah.
Because childhood. And then I noticed, oh shit, we're in a workshop of what, should I laugh now? Can I laugh now? Is it good to laugh now?
I am explicitly giving you permission to laugh.
Thank you.
Okay, what came up for me, I'm kind of siding with Spock on this episode.
Okay.
He's interacting with a de facto an autistic device that doesn't know feeling,
Yeah.
and he's really being asked an irrelevant question.
Okay.
I don't know the background to this, but it looks like he is going through a set of tests in order to get access to something. The computer's testing him.
Right.
And
The computers, yeah, go ahead.
A question about how he feels is actually irrelevant.
Okay.
Unless the computer was connected with some sort of sensory device to find out actually how he was feeling and then wanted to see if he could connect to his own feelings. But
Okay.
that didn't seem to be the case.
Ah,
Actually, I want to add something to what you said.
go ahead.
That it's a computer asking him for how he feels.
Yeah.
So who does he have to relate to but a computer telling him how to feel? So I'm with you about that.
Right. I mean, the setup is he was just freshly resurrected, and the computer's testing to see if he's all there. You know, and he gets to this piece. He got all the knowledge back, but
He could have said something simple. Well, I feel alive.
yeah, he could have, but he didn't. Right?
I kind of resonate with the wide openness of the question. I think that was kind of mentioned already. But
Uh-huh.
whenever someone confronts me, how are you doing today? It's the same thing that there's a social nicety where people just say fine, good, one answer.
Yeah.
But how am I feeling if I have to really answer it is much more complex.
Yeah.
And if I just don't know how to answer simply,
Of course.
right?
Okay.
Except if I lie or just kind of in general, am I good? Am I not so good? I don't know. Am I tired? I don't know.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing exactly that. Yes.
Yeah, so I don't know this movie at all,
Okay.
but for me the first part was kind of I could connect with it because this like all this thing is like how I feel very often with the world.
Okay.
Especially also here on this conference.
Ah.
Information and everything. So it's like it's a lot.
It's a lot,
Noise
yeah.
and everything bombarding.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's familiar.
Okay. Great. Anything else? Okay.
I was overwhelmed by the amount of information he was having thrown at him.
Yeah.
But I also admired his ability to what's it about?
Right.
Why the feeling?
Okay. Great. All right. So, let's start with how do you feel? So, the first exercise here now, pick one of these feelings and embody a time when you experienced it. Angry, sad, joyful, afraid, ashamed. Just pick one and maybe close your eyes and just imagine a time when you really felt one of these. Just sort of. And as you recollect yourself feeling that, notice how your body reacts to feeling that way. How was it in your throat? How was it in your jaw? Your belly? Your hands? Your cheeks? And when you feel like you have it, gently come back. So the first thing is, well, let's share. Someone like to share how it came up for them. You can say what the feeling was and how it showed up.
I chose the word angry,
Angry, okay.
and I felt it in my stomach and my jaw.
Yeah, okay.
Joy.
Joy,
I felt the loose jaw,
okay.
eyes opening up, it was opening up, and a slight gentle flow from my body.
Gentle flow. Okay. Anyone else like to share? Go ahead.
I just choose joyful, and it felt like around my stomach, just kind of like sunbeams just shooting.
Sunbeams shooting out. Wonderful.
Well, I had two things. First was ashamed, some memory, and I felt, no, why did I do that?
Ah,
And then the other was being afraid, and it's kind of the opposite, like erecting, looking around, feeling the pulse in the chest, and thinking of an escape strategy.
escape strategy, okay. And how did that, you said you felt kind of like this, right? Crouched?
Well, that was being ashamed.
Oh, that was being ashamed.
Being
For fear.
afraid was,
Oh, like vigilant.
okay,
Yeah, or something.
Looking for resources. Yeah.
Looking. Okay. All right, all right. So the reason I asked you for this exercise is to get you in touch with the possibility of alexithymia. So alexithymia is when you have difficulty naming your feelings. There are people who really struggle with naming their feelings. They may only have the physical reactions to inform them that they're experiencing those feelings. Like for instance, if someone is angry, they may have, a raised voice, flushed cheeks, stinging eyes, tears, hunched shoulders, a pit in the stomach. But that might be the only signals they're getting, right? Until they might not even notice that they're angry until they're close to just overwhelmed. And somebody, how come you're so angry? It's like, I'm not angry, or something like that, right? And they have to listen. Oh, my voice is raised. My fists are clenched. Oh, maybe I'm angry. But there's not that easy connection to this is how I'm feeling and naming it as angry. They have to reverse engineer the feeling from the physical reactions. So that's the first thing I want to introduce you to. And we're going to come back to alexithymia once we switch gears for a second. It's like, what is autism? And first of all, what is autism? I see a lot of theories about what is autism. We're not here to talk about all the possibilities. But one quote that resonated with me was this person, Andy Clark, that says, perception itself is a kind of controlled hallucination. You experience a structured world because you expect a structured world. And the sensory information here acts as feedback on your expectations. So let's talk about predictive processing. Basically, the idea is that we go through the world in this loop, feedback loop. We have a model, expectations of how the world is supposed to be. We get inputs from our senses, eyes and balance and whatever. And then we compare the input signals to our existing model. And we can compare it and we can either say, oh, this comparison is giving us some signal, some valid information, or it's noise, whatever this comparison is, noise, throw it away. And then when we take that signal, we update the model, and then we go in this loop. So, everybody, the theory goes everybody has this loop. But, each of these things could go in different ways, sort of a typical way and then atypical ways. So, the expectations, right, may be too narrow or rigid, right, or they may be too vague. And so when we get the sensory input in, it's like, oh, this expectation was so narrow, and then this hit, and this signal is a lot. There's this concept of monotropism, where the brain may struggle to give enough attention to this sensory input because it's too busy with this other sensory input. Like it can only, monotropic is like, I'm looking at this one at a time and everything else is like not coming in. And then there's the possibility of overweighted sensory input. Like this stuff that's coming in is just too much, it's overwhelming that part of the model, and that the brain, an autistic brain is overweighting the input. Bottom up, it's called, bottom up processing, where it overweights the sensory input. And so the point is, when any of those arrows gets kind of, overwhelmed or messed up, it can lead to constant uncertainty. Like the model's not stable, what's this just going around in circles. And so it can lead to arousal, anxiety, overload, and this overwhelmed organism can end up in stuck process, in trauma. And so this is kind of where I'm going with the point of how autism works into trauma focusing. But let's stop for questions. Any questions?
Just when we mentioned that I hear all the sensory,
Yeah.
which is bottom up.
Yeah.
Is the predictive a bit top down or
Yeah, the predictive is top down, and I think part of the issue is that autistic brains tend to be wired to overweight the sensory input. It pays too much attention to the input signal and less attention to the top down relative to.
Just to get back to something that was on the
Oh, yeah.
previous slide,
Yeah.
which was wanted to ask what you meant in detail by reverse engineering.
When I say reverse engineering, I have to take the available evidence and go, oh, I'm reverse engineering that I am angry.
Yeah, but
That's
you're using experience to do that, basically.
yeah.
Somebody's giving you impact and said, well, when you do this or that, this looks to me like you're angry, and you
Right.
put that in your database, and then
Yeah, you've learned.
kind of calculate the feeling.
Exactly, and that's why I said reverse engineer. I'm a software engineer by profession, so
Okay.
reverse engineering is when you take the output of some program and you try to reverse engineer what was happening inside the box.
You need a programming body, right?
Right, the programming body. I think that's a good way to look at it. Go ahead.
The next slide,
Yeah.
this loop,
Oh, the loop. Yes.
this loop, I didn't understand that right, what is like looping?
Oh, what's looping? That's
Yeah.
us going through the world. Every time, we start, we're like, okay, this, I'm in a room. I have a model that the room is, like this, and then, maybe something's flickering. If something's flickering, I go, oh, okay, that light is flickering. Okay, I'm gonna update my model. And okay, the light's flickering. I know it. It's okay. Now I know. So for some autistic people, they can't stand it. The light's flickering, and their model is not capable of updating it to the point where they're just ignoring it. They may be sitting there, ooh, this light's flickering. I can't take it, Or the fridge, the refrigerator is humming, And that's one way in which this cycle can break down, because it's constantly trying to, re-update the model over and over again.
And if you have integrated this learning
Yeah,
with the device,
yeah.
so it's part of it, and would this have an impact on how you perceive the sensory information? Will this change your brain?
I don't fully understand your question.
Like you have learned, assume you have learned, oh, it's the refrigerator.
Yeah,
Will it make a difference in your sensing?
some people can handle it better than others.
Yeah.
That's
Some people will probably say, okay, then I have to leave the room, I don't have to
exactly
go into full panic mode.
right.
Or maybe then the sound changes.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
Because some people find it easier to ignore it. Some people don't hear it at all. And some people can't tune it out, and they have to leave the room.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the essence of the autistic spectrum. Some people just have to leave the room because they can't update the model to go, nah, don't have to worry about this noise.
Yeah. This reminds me of this type of model of doing something, getting sensory feedback, information, updating the model, is how people learn how to, let's say, throw something, hit a target. Or
Oh, yeah.
Learning to play American baseball, and you want to play catch, you want to throw the ball.
Yeah.
You miss it, okay.
Yeah.
You miss the next one, okay, but then you sleep on it, next day it's a little bit more accurate.
Yeah.
Do people who are on the autistic spectrum have trouble with that kind of motor
Some
sensory?
people do, yes. Yes, in fact, that's a whole, I'm going to get to that. That's an excellent observation. So great. Any other questions before I go on? And of course, feel free to interrupt me anytime. So what I was going to say is, it's not a spectrum like less autistic, more autistic, right? A more convenient metaphor is sliders, like a graphic equalizer. There are many different characteristics that a given autistic person could be, up or down, hyper or hypo sensitive. And here's just one example, where it's like some autistic people have difficulty speaking, so maybe nonverbal or non-speaking, or maybe they speak a whole lot. Some people stim, they try to calm themselves with repetitive motions like flapping or, wiggling or making funny noises happens. Some people struggle with eye contact, and a lot of times it's because, well, you know how they say the eyes are the window to the soul, right? It's a lot of sensory input. If you can't turn it off, boy, it's like looking directly into the sun, right? So it's like, don't do that. So some people really struggle with that. Some people have special interests, like, trains, or like Star Trek, or penguins, focusing. Some people are literal minded. Some people are very, it has to be exactly this way. There's no metaphor. It's like, what do you mean? It's floating like a cloud. It's not actually a cloud or something. Some people are very metaphorical. Some autistic people struggle with appropriate fear responses. Fearless. Some people have sensory overload issues. Some people have routines. Must have my peanut butter sandwich every morning with the crust cut off. Same breakfast every day. Something like that. Some people want to be solitary. They're sensorily overwhelmed by people. And then some people struggle with social cues, like when should I be talking, or how are you? What do I say to how are you? Do you want the whole answer? I don't know. Stuff like that. And this is just, this slider is very long. So let me give a little experiential exercise. Try to pay attention to one hair on your skin. See if you can kind of find an awareness of one hair. This one. Poke at it. You feel it. Now try and expand your awareness to all the hairs on your skin. Can you imagine, noticing where each one is right now, how much wind is blowing on it, how much, effort it takes to pay attention to all of it. How is that? Now imagine you couldn't turn it off, and you always felt every hair on your skin all the time. What would it be like? How much sensory input would there be? It's a lot, right? A lot. I have a colleague who was complaining to me, I can feel every hair on my skin at all times, And so just imagine how much cognitive load that
Can your colleague also feel all the hairs on his head?
I didn't ask, but I'm presuming probably.
So when he gets his haircut, does it feel like surgery?
There's a whole subcategory of how do I get a haircut among autistic people. There's some people who really struggle. Or going to the dentist, even worse. Can you imagine getting drilled, and your cranium shaking, and that's a whole category of struggles. Even showering can be a struggle. It's like all this water everywhere and beating on my skin, I can't take it. Perfectly valid, observation, yeah. So how did that land for you? Any reactions?
Well, I could feel individual hairs or sections only if I move my finger a certain distance above the skin to make contact with the tips of the hairs.
Yeah.
It's an interesting experience. That's when, through this type of movement and interaction, I can feel them. Otherwise, they go silent.
Right, they go silent. Right, we can tune them out. And some people struggle more than others to tune those kinds of things out.
I had zip down and nothing.
You couldn't feel any of the hairs on your skin at all. Okay.
Yeah, another point. What happens for such people if they, let's say, they feel the hairs on their face, or it could be the arm or anywhere, and then they shave the hairs off?
Yeah.
Do they feel, and there's always a bit of the hair underneath the skin, going to the hair follicle, do they still continue to feel that? Or do they need at least a little bit of movement of the hair above the skin to send a signal down to the hair follicle?
This is a more detailed question than I'm prepared to answer. That is an amazing question. And we would have to find somebody who experiences it to ask them in more detail. I love that question. I mean, and that's part of the grappling with the spectrum, right? There are so many different ways that people can experience this sort of thing in, maybe they don't experience it if there's no hair above the skin. Maybe they're feeling it in the follicle.
They feel it growing.
Maybe they feel it growing, And part of this exercise is to expand our awareness of what could be different, what could be atypical, outside the sort of norm of the experience. And exactly those questions are just perfect questions for exploring those, boundaries that we probably haven't thought much about. I love it. Thank you.
Yes, I'm asking myself, when is the point when somebody with autism or their parents find out that there are senses that are different?
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
It's so difficult.
I have a son and he might be in the spectrum and he's 33 and I'm just close to tears because I feel, wow, what have he gone through?
Yeah.
So
It's okay. It's okay to be there with it. This is the mission, right? To raise the awareness in our community of these kinds of experiences, and try to get ourselves into the mindset, in embodying what it would be like, because it's
how to ask.
How to ask
about that.
Absolutely. This is exactly why we're here right now.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing. It's vulnerable share. Thank you for sharing. We're right here with you, and stay with us, and hopefully we will learn a lot today. Let's all learn about how we could be in the world. Okay, so from that experiential exercise, let's talk a little bit about, there's autistic traits, right? That's just how we are. And then there's autistic trauma, it's distress. And it's really important to make that, to understand that there are separate phenomena, and they kind of, this line, of course, is not like a clean line, but let's be aware of the distinction. So for instance, sensory hypersensitivity, like we talked about, that's beyond the normal population. That's a trait. But then hypersensitivity beyond one's baseline can be a distress symptom. Like if I'm stressed out, right, then suddenly somebody talking to me a little bit loud might feel like a real shout and be like, don't stop shouting at me. My wife would be like, I'm not shouting at you. And I'm like, because I'm stressed out about work or something. I'm already over my baseline, right? So that's a distress symptom. Stimming we talked about, flapping, wiggling. These things are, that can be a trait. And then the trauma might be when you've been scolded, like you're not allowed to flap. It's got a mask. Then the distress of having to suppress one's feelings can be, or feeling to do these things can be very traumatic. Atypical expressions of emotions. I mean, some people, they laugh at funerals. They inappropriate something, or they don't cry when they're sad. And that's just a way. Some people are wired differently about how emotions come out. And then there's, the trauma, the distress. If they've been scolded, how dare you cry how dare you laugh at a funeral? They might stop laughing at all, or they might try to, restrain themselves, and that can be very traumatic. And of course, I tried to translate everything to German.
Can I ask?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
About the stress.
Yeah.
Role of acute versus chronic stress.
Okay, yeah,
I think it's fair to say in our, at least in the West, in our modern society,
yeah,
we don't live in, we might think we live in dangerous times. We don't live in the type of dangerous times with acute stress where we walking in the forest and we happen to run into a bear or a lion or something. Or we really have to react quickly, big stress reaction, then afterwards the letting go and the coming down.
right.
How do people on the spectrum respond to acute stress? Now, it doesn't have to be the lion. I'm not saying the lion or the bear, but if,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know, if they're doused with cold water, for example, that's an acute stress.
well,
It's there and it's over quickly.
yeah, well, you know, I mean, there are there's a whole spectrum of possibilities. Some people have meltdowns, you know, they can't handle the fridge buzzing and they finally just lose it and they start
Yeah, but our
shouting.
ancestors
Yeah.
didn't have to listen to
That's
a
right,
refrigerator buzzing.
exactly.
Our ancestors grew up in the world, we had to listen for the rustling of the leaves in the forest where a lion or a bear is coming.
Yeah.
We focus our attention,
Yeah.
and then when the danger's over, the eyes go back to just scanning the environment.
Right. Or they, you know, some people, and I think I'm one of these people who tends to go into robot mode. Like, I'm going to solve this problem, and I'm not going to have an emotional reaction now. I'm saving that for later. And then later, I'm going to have my, you know, wipe out and let it all out, the catharsis. So there can be a delayed catharsis, too.
But to me, that sounds, for our ancestors, that would be a survival mechanism.
Absolutely.
They don't have a meltdown when the tiger comes. They
Right.
fight the tiger and they can have a meltdown later.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a whole, you know, paradigm of, like, I think it was the villagers, and the villagers have to have hunters who could, like, hyper-focus for days chasing a, you know, wild animal or something, right, to hunt them down. And there have to be the storytellers who, like, really, you know, animatedly, you know, express and intake all this information and have some rough correlation to, like, the hunters being the autistics and the storytellers being the ADHD, you know, something like that. I mean, there are paradigms. I might have kind of approximated this. You should go look it up. There are much better explanations than mine.
So there is the original experience, and then the strategies come, which are also kind of maybe something the outer world registers.
Yeah.
So, and it's very difficult to define what is what.
Exactly.
Even for the person.
Exactly. Even for the person, especially when they've been drilled, you know, inculcated from childhood. You must do this way, you must do. I'm going to get to that in the next slide. Because, so we talked about lack of eye contact, you know, and then the distress might be forced eye contact, inauthentic eye contact, special interest, haha, train Star Trek and focusing. And the flip side can be like isolation, withdrawal, shame about, you know, oh, you don't like to play with trains or something, or you don't want to play with anyone else, or whatever. And the point is there's lots more. And so what I think the real point that I want to make is many stereotypical autistic behaviors are really autistic distress behaviors. But it's a manifestation of the core trauma of being autistic in a world built for neurotypicals. And so let's be with that, like how much that can be. It's a lot. I just wanted to point out that there's Janae Elizabeth has this traumageek.com, and there's this blog. I'll show you how to download the slides later if you want, but there's a whole longer graphic about autistic traits versus autistic trauma that I adapted this short version from. Any questions so far? Thoughts?
So you will share your slides with us?
Yes. At the end, there's some QR codes. You can just click on that. I've taken the slightly, what's the right word? I put it behind a download link where you type in your email address, and I can put you on my email address. If you really don't want to, just contact me. I'll give it to you without the email address. But trying to build my email, mailing list cohort if you're willing to sign up, subscribe to my newsletter, as the joke goes. Okay, so yeah. What came up for you? Anything else that has come up for you after this list between traits and trauma?
taking in also the perspective of a parent. My adult daughter has told me about autistic traits that she's recognizing in herself, and that are, so kind of your reverse engineering of the emotion model. I think that there's this awareness that's coming alive now from people who had the experience of not fitting in, not knowing why, and all of a sudden, and that same story of, the trauma of the distress and the symptoms that are coming up are more about the distress of other people's reaction to them. So this complex way of untangling it is one way, but also she's also finding that having this definition and this way of understanding herself is also helping her to understand and make sense of why she's chosen all of the things and how she's adapted to all of the things. That makes so much sense now. And she says, it just kind of like makes her aware of what to prepare for, how to rest into things. So
Yeah.
I think that question of, even with feelings, like not being able to recognize what a feeling is or how to answer the question, when you have this ability to prepare for it, even though your sensitivity might be on the spectrum, like the fridge going off, you might have originally not had any tolerance for, you can cope with it once you know.
Right. Once you know that you are sensitive, then it can help you change your relationship to certain things. Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to comment that it's a very common pipeline these days that, like, parents take their kids for a diagnosis and they do the checklist and the parent goes, hey, wait a second, I'm doing this checklist and, it's happened to several of my colleagues, so it's a thing. Yeah.
What I was sensing into this, what we were sharing, and then my thoughts came to these different kinds of processing speed.
Yeah, definitely.
And how irritating we are for each other.
Yeah.
Whether you are now autistic or not autistic, because you can be irritated, obviously, or because why would we normalize? Because we are irritated. Like maybe autists are irritated by other environmental noise, and we are irritated, the so-called, I don't even know where I belong, but by this human noise I cannot handle.
Right.
Vice versa.
Absolutely.
And this is so, where does it start, where does it end? So it's
Absolutely.
this is a this image is recreating.
Yeah, and it can be very specific. Some people go, to ask an autistic person, how come, you can't handle people chattering, but you love, death metal, like boom, 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 really loud. It's like, well, I control the death metal, right? I get to choose what loud, bangy noise I'm listening to, for instance. Or I'm sensitive to this kind of noise and not that kind of noise. That's a very common thing.
And how come that I, as a normal, cannot control my reaction to a human being who does this?
Right, absolutely, exactly.
Is not the refrigerator for me, or what?
Yeah.
The normality is shaking up.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that. You had a question, right?
It was about identifying with the oversensitivity.
Yeah.
You've been classified as an overly sensitive kid.
Uh-huh.
Also, my daughter was the one that said, you're stimming when you do, because I do this when I'm in a listening session.
Okay, yeah.
Because it keeps me calm.
Right, it keeps you calm. That's perfectly normal in the sense that normal is a setting on your dryer. Right? That's the joke. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what came up for me is this, I know this term has been applied to ADHD. And it said, you have ADHD, and then there's someone, there's a certain research in there, Dr. Hollowell, described something called acquired ADHD.
Yeah.
Using too much digital media, and people's their nervous system gets somewhat stressed. So I'm wondering whether to some extent it could be something like acquired autism.
That's a very interesting and very deep question.
Okay, I'll give you a specific example
Yeah.
where I think one can see it. It's in, believe it or not, in the world of poker.
Okay.
Because to be successful as a poker player, you need to have the poker face.
Yeah, yeah.
Disconnecting facial expressions from, disconnecting inner feelings from the facial expressions so you don't give away your cards, so to speak. And there was a case of someone who won the Poker World Championship. You know, he played the final hand, he won, he's the king of the world in poker, everyone is cheering, and he still has this poker face. It takes him minutes to come out of that and to finally get, connect his face to his emotions.
Right. Well, he learned, to cut it off, and I think that's something we're going to talk about, learning to cut off from hypersensitivity, hyperexpression. That sounds like a phenomenon. And it would be a huge rabbit hole to go down what I'm about to talk about, but when you say acquired autism, there's an interesting intertwining between the development of the autism diagnosis and the development of the reactive attachment disorder diagnosis. Both of them came, in the 40s, 50s, so on, and were conflated in some respects. And in fact, I'm suddenly blanking on the name of one of the really famous researchers in the early autism work who was leaning into kind of a refrigerator mother theory, that autism was caused by, cold, unfeeling mothers, and that autism could be, healed by nurturing, warm mothering. And if I recall the anecdote correctly, part of the confusion for him was he had an adopted daughter who was suffering from an attachment disorder and got better with, nurturing parenting. And so because of the conflation, because the symptoms between autism and attachment disorder, there are many similarities, because the downstream trauma manifestations, right, are often quite similar. So back in the day, there was confusion.
I can tell you from rehab research that having a brain injury, you can have autistic features. So it's an example of an acquired. So when there's a traumatic brain injury that isn't like trauma that we think of it, but an object hitting the brain or like your head or like a concussion, you can have a sudden shift in personality. So where you may have been an intuitive person, you become somebody who's very logic oriented. You have to function with routines, and a lot of the hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity that he's talking about are nearly identical. So whether it's acquired autism or acquired kind of collection of symptoms, but I would argue that if we say personalities in the brain and the brain has changed, it would be acquired. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that augmentation. Anything else? Okay, what's next? So let's talk a little bit about now alexithymia and focusing, right? So sometimes, right, difficulty naming emotions can stem from lack of safety around experiencing or exhibiting emotions, right? Stop flapping about the happy stimming. How can you be so insensitive about laughing at a funeral, right? That can traumatically cause people to cut themselves off from feeling their emotions, right? That's one. And I also want to make the point that some people just struggle to name their emotions from a neurological point of view. And it's actually quite important to make room for both, because if we assume that they're just traumatically not feeling and we try to push them to feel, that's not going to work if they just can't do it, right? So we have to be conscious of both of these being possibilities as we come into our own, companioning someone who might be struggling to name their feelings, for instance. So my goal here is to give my own kind of personal thoughts on how we should be as companions, and I really would strongly invite anybody who has something to chime in about to say, oh, I have an idea about how to be a companion to someone like this, because I'm really looking for stories, or maybe I have companioned someone like this and this is what worked, or I have been that person and this is something that worked for me. That's the real gold that I'm looking to get from all of you. So thank you for being here to help me, acquire the shared knowledge. But here's my thoughts on companion, right? We gotta really be conscious of having a companion with a lot of space and welcoming room for whatever comes. Gotta let go of preconceptions of what happy or sad or afraid should look like. Attuned to the focuser's nonverbal cues versus their self-reporting of their emotional state. For instance, I'm perfectly fine. I'm perfectly neutral. I don't feel anything. It's like that might happen, and you might notice the incongruity. And also just be aware of the feeling about the feeling. A lot of times the inner critic comes so fast, like, how dare you be angry? No, you can't be angry. It just comes and it just cuts off the feeling. So that can be something where if that's what's going on, then being the companion to help the focuser really make room for the feeling and the feeling about the feeling that might be kind of quashing the original feeling. What spaces might you make for your focuser's process? And welcome your thoughts.
I did some focusing with my son,
Okay.
and he was always very afraid that nothing comes.
Nothing comes.
So inviting also the nothing was helpful.
Yes, excellent. That is one of the points. I'm going to get to this later about the very scant literature. There's like one paper by Dave Young, right? Famous focusing person. And he was talking about autism, and one of his main points was the background feeling. When there's nothing, when there's no feeling. and so that's a really important point.
What's his name, please?
Dave Young. It will be on a slide later, so don't worry. Anyone else? Yes.
So I'm autistic myself.
Oh.
And I'm also synesthetic. That means that I see the colors.
We're gonna get to that. Awesome.
Like in my case, I see the colors of letters and
Sure.
numbers, sorry. And so in my processing process, I see a lot of colors. Like it is basically mostly colors. And I don't know if it's connected to my synesthetics, and I didn't got any information, like maybe some papers about
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Thank you. You can help me inform my, musings on this with your lived experience. So your presence here is wonderful.
Yeah, and like what helps me is like first of all, I don't have alexithymia. I have a connection with my feelings in my body, but even though I still need kind of a lot of time for focusing. So when we here on this conference, when we have like quick exercises like 10 minutes or something, I don't get it. Like I need like 30 minutes. It's yeah.
You're like that. That's how you are in the world.
Yeah.
It's good that you know yourself that way.
Yeah, and also when there is this a lot of times here also there is this like attunement with like the person is telling you guided focusing in a way. So it doesn't work for me at all also because what works for me in fact in the focusing like in partnership for example is that I have really a lot of time and that this companions really is with me. Yeah. So if I'm for 15 minutes, I just wait for me to be in a kind of connection with my body. It just this 15 minutes, and then I can have very intense process in 3 minutes. A lot can happen, but I cannot be in a hurry. You know, it kills the process for me at all. And when it is this guided focusing, it's for me like how you people can go with it, like.
Right, right.
Because I hear that for a lot of people it works, and I believe it, but kind of I cannot.
Not you.
Yeah, and I even cannot imagine how could it work, in fact. And yeah, so and I invented with my focusing partner even a phrase that helps me. That it is very simple. Is that you have time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I know that I have time, but when my focusing partner say it to me, like even few times, it helps me, yeah, because it. I think that a lot of in a lot of situation, it's always not enough time, you know, and even in these focusing things that should. I think we should have time. We are in a hurry.
Right, right.
We are 4 days here, but we are still in a hurry.
4 days and so much information.
Yeah.
In English we say drinking from a fire hose. You know, I don't know if that resonates with any of you.
Yeah.
Is there a German expression like that? Does anybody know?
I don't know.
It's only a positive one in vollen Zügen genießen. That means you have a beer and you just want to get it down.
Okay.
But
That's a good thing. Drinking.
Not that it's forced down.
Right, right. Drinking from a fire hose is too much. But I think the most important part of your reporting here is that you know yourself, right? You know what you need and you know how to ask for it. And that's so empowering. I'm celebrating that. So, you know, you have time. And I think part of that is maybe the conditioned social awkwardness of like silence. Like, shouldn't I be saying something? Don't have to say, you know, and it's great that you figured out a way to affirm that you don't have to say anything for 15 minutes, because that's what you need. That's great. And so I think a lot of this will be exactly for individual autistic focusers, how can their companion show up for them? And here's one way, and you know, I welcome any other ideas of what other ways that really will resonate with someone.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say, I don't know if others have this, but and I'm just curious, that in my focusing processes, many times I like see a place that exists in real life,
Yeah.
like from where I was going a lot to the holidays when I was a child, but I still go there, and it's like kind of, I don't know, the place that my mind feels safe there.
Okay.
And a lot of times I am there in this process, and there are some other things happening with my body and so on, but it comes over and over again, this exact place.
Great.
And I don't know, I was just curious if anybody.
Yeah. Let's stay with that as we keep going. I think we'll come back to it. I suspect it'll be relevant again. So here's the next exercise. Close your eyes and visualize an apple. And as you visualize that apple, ask yourself, how clear is it? How detailed is it? How vivid is it? How persistent is it? How well can you hold on to it? And let me know when you have a feeling for these answers to these questions. Just gently come back. Okay. Everyone back? Okay. Let's talk about the visualization scale, the vividness of visual imagery questionnaire. This questionnaire has 5 levels, ranging from 1, which is aphantasia. You have just no image, just blank. Okay. And then there's hypophantasia, where it's just barely an apple. Then there's sort of average. Okay, there's now. Then there's like 4, it's kind of vivid visuals, leaning, stable apple. And then 5 is kind of like hyperphantasic. It's like it just feels like reality. It's like this juicy, shining apple. Maybe you can even feel like you're biting into it, the juice running down your chin. Something like that. Might be multisensory. So here's 1 through 5. Let's take a quick poll. 1, how many 1s? There's a 1 there. How many 2s? 2. How many 3s? A couple of 3s, 4 3s. How many 4s? Several 4s. Okay. 4, 5 4s. How many 5s? Okay, another 5 or so 5s. So somewhat, it's not entirely even split, but a pretty broad range. Everybody's represented here, right? Okay. So let's talk about aphantasia and hyperphantasia and how they show up in focusing, right? Aphantasia is not always obvious. I actually focused with a couple of aphantasic individuals, and I didn't even know that they were aphantasic until they told me. Like, one of them was talking about some red ball and how it was, and later I'm like, we talked about, I'm aphantasic. I was like, really? You talked about this red ball? And they were like, I was kind of doing that for your benefit, and another one made it a point. Seeing isn't the only way to experience spatial concepts. In another case, someone was talking about some sort of hairball, that was like sticky and it was like rough and whatever. And later I was like, oh, you're aphantasic. You weren't visualizing it? It's like, ew, who would want to visualize a hairball? But it's like, but they were aware of the quality of the hairball being, rough and sticky. They didn't have to visualize it to be present with the quality. And so one of the points is sometimes guidance to, quote, visualize, can backfire, because maybe the person's like, I can't visualize that. Or maybe they're even resistant, they're like, don't tell me to visualize. I can't do that. So it can be important to be aware of the possibility of using less specific vocabulary about prompts. Like, instead of saying, can you visualize it, it's like, how is it, what kind of qualities does it have in ways that open the discussion, the sensing to other ways. Because some people experience shame about, like, I can't visualize it, and they kind of, resist the whole thing because they don't want to confront this, shame about it. On the other hand, there's hyperphantasia that can result in really detailed, sensorially rich, kinetic visualizations, and that can be very powerful in a focusing context, right? Who has had focusing the context that have been really, engaging, multisensory, visual? Yeah. And one interesting point about that, and Ann Weiser-Cornell mentions this in the teaching manual, is sometimes people who get so into the narrative of the movie, they kind of get lost in the story, and then they kind of lose grounding, contact with, it can happen. And one really useful prompt is like, how are you in all this? Where are you in all this? That can really shift the relationship between this like beautiful, engaging movie back to the focusing itself, the connection. So I think that's something to keep in mind when focusing with someone who might be exhibiting hyperphantasia. Okay, then synesthesia. Now we have the whole slide on synesthesia. So intertwinings of sensory experiences. And one thing, we were talking about I'll go slightly out of order. Neural hyperconnectivity. One of the like neurobiological hypotheses about autism is that it's like there's a pruning process where, you know, the brain starts out kind of undifferentiated, everything's connected to everything else, and as we develop, part of the development is pruning the connections so that some things fire and some things don't fire, and it reduces the sensory input or the processing to a manageable level. And the hypothesis here is that the pruning is less in autistic people, which means there's this hyperconnectivity and everything's connected to everything else, and that can manifest in different ways. And one way is this kind of intertwining of senses, just as you were talking about, you know, letters having colors. And I particularly have the exact example, or having taste, you know, your word might taste like strawberry jam or something.
When you talk about this and when we are in this field of different modalities, and autistic and artistic, it's just a letter.
Yeah, you know, yeah.
And I don't know how it would work with a person, with autistic person, or if you would ask him, could you ask where is it most, or what is meaningful in this whole image, or if it comes in words or movements, and to let the person like give the space. I could say I feel tasted, or I see moving, or I don't know, maybe this would, or because it's also it's quite common.
Yeah.
I feel, because this example with the image.
Yeah.
Because I see some, when you said with the apple, this was a whole process.
Uh-huh.
The image of an apple appeared and then it faded, so I could have held up my hand with all the 5.
Yeah.
Because I was so, your word, like your prompt made something, then I decided, then it faded away, then there was black,
Yeah.
and then I was not sure if I even want to visualize, and then something came up. So
Okay.
this was so interesting.
Yeah, so interesting. There's so much richness to the, you know, the landscape.
To allow that we create different words for sensory experience.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm going to get to that even too, you know, vocabulary. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this comes to the area of neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who's essentially blind,
Okay.
and maybe some years ago I visited him, and I experienced him listening to the messages on his voicemail.
Uh-huh.
And he was playing it about 3 times the normal
Okay,
speed.
yeah. Yeah.
And you can understand that?
Yeah.
And then I looked into it. It's actually for people who lose eyesight, that visual cortex, the landscape in the brain of the visual cortex get included for other things like hearing.
Sure. That makes sense.
So I'm wondering whether this is, when we label there's a tendency to label something as not normal,
Yeah.
like hyperconnectivity, but for our ancestors in a certain world,
Yeah.
hyperconnected could be hyperplastic,
Yeah.
and meaning extremely adaptive to,
Yeah.
to situations. So it's
Sure.
just, maybe the world has become such as that is not necessary anymore.
Right, right. I mean, you know, that goes into a whole long discussion, which, about the sort of medical model of disability versus the social model of disability. Is it that you're disabled because you're missing some sort of, you know, you're missing an arm, you know, you're missing a capability, or is it that the social constructs have made it so that your natural way of being in the world is no longer, you know, fitting into the round peg that society narrowly demands, right? You know, in many respects, there were traditional roles for people who had these, you know, kinds of brains. You know, you don't want to talk to anybody, you want to spend all day with your books. Okay, go become a monk, right? And then it's a perfectly respectable profession where you can just, you know, write all day and not talk to anybody, right? Or be a shepherd, you know, go out in the field, know people, play an instrument all day. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. and there just isn't that kind of social role as much anymore. And so the distress, comes, social model of disability is like the distress comes from the lack of the social role, not because the person is pathologized, right? So, excellent point. That would be a whole another, presentation that I would love to give sometime. Okay, so another example is like sequences, like a phone number existing in space, maybe. Here's an interesting one I learned about recently: mirror touch synesthesia. It's like if I see somebody get poked in the arm, I might feel a poke in my arm, having witnessed the other person's having a poke. So that's another kind of synesthesia. And then one really funny example, I went to a particle accelerator summer program one time, and one of these professors was talking about, I have a colleague, and he says he can taste radiation. And I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I can taste radiation. Well, how does radiation taste? It tastes brown. So that's what I thought of when I thought of all sorts of possibilities here. So, go ahead.
If we don't have any radioactive detectors, that person could be extremely useful.
Yeah. For a limited amount of time, of course, and used up and then. So companioning someone with, aphantasia or synesthesia or hyperphantasia. Again, it's about attunement, right? If someone struggles with visualizing, let's see if we can find non-visual cues, see if we can find that vocabulary that resonates with them. Be aware that hyperphantasia can be distracting or overwhelming for the focuser and or the companion. I already, out of order, said where and how are you in relation to all this. And another interesting thing I think is really important is we might have to resist the urge to interpret or analyze if there's this big, rich, narrative or something. Because interpretation can lead to one of Jenlin's two dead ends. Like, oh, I know what's going on. Oh, this is about your father. Oh, this is about whatever. Whatever it is, sometimes it's really important just to stay with the scene as it evolves and not try to say, what does this, very detailed object, that you're visualizing mean. So I'm opening this. How would you make space for this? What comes for you?
What comes to me is what you say, for me, is already included into focusing. So it comes to me that, well, as a focuser, I wouldn't ask for visualization. I would let it open. And so for me comes that focusing might be perfect.
Exactly, yeah. Absolutely. We're already there, and that's actually part of the point of my presentation, and maybe just emphasizing that these are, ways in which the focusing modality is attuned or suitable for people who are having these particular manifestations, behaviors, traits.
Sorry, where stands AWC for?
Oh, Ann Weiser Cornell.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. This is a quote from the teacher's manual.
Okay.
Hi.
I think even this is maybe a curiosity, even the phrasing that we use, like make space for this, or how we might conceptualize ourselves, what the felt sense might be, we can let go of that too, because what I'm wondering is even literal interpretations of make space for this, like, well, what does that mean?
Space.
Sort of like Spock looking at like, well, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And right, and I think just being in contact with the not knowing exactly how we ought to be doing that is the point of this. This opens our awareness. So thank you for naming that.
I can, when I learned focusing, a movement, and you don't mention movement. A movement was the medium who came up.
Okay, yeah. You're right. I haven't mentioned movement. I could mention movement, but I didn't think of that. So thank you so much for saying. Absolutely, movement and in fact, I think one of the mirrorings, mirroring, kinesthetic mirroring can be very powerful as a companion. Like somebody tilts their head, and I tilt my head to try and resonate with how they're experiencing.
I would think that, but
Yeah.
I would be hesitating. I wouldn't know if I'm reinforcing something which I shouldn't.
Ah,
I would, and I think probably I would just ask, how was that for you?
okay.
But I don't know, but this would make me insecure as a companion.
Okay.
But what you said is that you find with every focusing partner that you find words that work or that you find some bridges.
Yeah.
You have to find out, I guess.
Absolutely. This is experimentation and iteration.
And this don't be shy sometimes. I have had once a client, and I was not sure if she was on the autistic spectrum, and I think we managed somehow, but I noticed my insecurity, and I didn't know what I shall do with it now. So
Okay.
I just noticed it. That was for me helpful. Yeah, maybe if I'm the it was helpful for me to make it really clear that I have no clue.
Yeah.
What shall I do now?
The only thing that I know is I know nothing.
Yes.
Right?
I mean,
Socrates
in
or
this
something.
particular case, because it was a kind of I don't know, which made me stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I would like to share something. It came up in my awareness now that I had a client who was autistic, a blonde woman, and it was really difficult to connect with her and
Yeah.
to find words. But she's very creative,
Yeah.
and I'm also a child psychotherapist, and
Okay.
I work with children. And then I was thinking maybe I can be a better companion to give, what do you say, Play-Doh
Yeah.
and paper and scissors, and it was really amazing. Then there was a lot of coming up, and she was creating, and I was just companioning it,
Ah.
and that was a really good. I was very happy that I tried to do something else than talking or listening.
Uh-huh.
To take something from my children experience working
Right.
with children, and it was really
Great.
amazing. Yeah.
Awesome. It sounds like you found the way
Yeah, I
to
found the way.
communicate.
Yes.
I mean, there's a really famous. Who's read Oliver Sacks's *The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat*? Right? Brilliant book. There's a story in there about these identical twins who only communicated in prime numbers, and they would just sit there and tell each other numbers, and the other one would challenge the other one, and the other one would think, is that prime? And then if it was prime, you go, oh, and that was how they communicated with each other, how they socialized, how they connected. So finding the connection can be very powerful, and maybe not obvious, but with some flexibility, some creativity, you can look for.
I just thought of something. Sorry for the popcorn. I didn't
Okay,
mean to
no,
interrupt,
go
but, I had an adult client who really needs to understand everything around him. So he's on the autistic spectrum.
Yeah.
Doesn't want to be defined that way
Yeah.
as severely autistic
Sure.
children. So there's this negative perception.
Sure.
And so I'm not sure if it's, him putting more barriers to things, or just accepting it that this is a part of it. But so for focusing, he needs to have all the research, the website,
Sure.
the awareness,
Right.
before we can even
Sure.
use the wording.
Absolutely. All the
And
terms have to be
curious.
defined, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
really letting the client, or I guess precisely, but the person that you're listening to, in this context of a companion, we're already arriving at it that we're in a focusing role,
Yeah.
right? So there's awareness about it, but when we're outside of that, it does take a little bit more, I think, of
Yeah,
how we
definitely.
introduce it.
Absolutely. I'm just squatting and periodically check the time because I forgot my watch, so I gotta. Don't mind me.
I can add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
It is maybe what a lot of people does, but I think it's important in partnership to really like say before focusing about needs, like what do I like, for example, in that partner will do, and afterwards that we discuss and I can say the feedback. So that when you ask me this and this, it's it interrupted me and or I liked it and so on. And I do it like this, and after some time with the same partner, we already like know each other. And I think for some people it's not that important, but I think in this case it's really important because yeah, it can be completely different. And another thing is that for me, for example, maybe this with the images that I cannot really easily have this image when somebody asks me to, because I can have these images if I go like with my own flow, but if somebody tells me to imagine something, I can't. And so when it's this like classical clearing space, it doesn't work for me at all. And I hate it. And what works for me is just to connect with the body, because also the part of clearing the space is that you do not think about this and this, you do not engage yourself in this and that, and it doesn't work for me because like my mind is all the time thinking and analyzing, and it's not possible to switch it off, you know.
Sure.
I'm Zen Buddhist and I can sit in meditation for 3 days and it's still going on, and it's, you know, it will not be like this in 10 minutes for sure. So so it's only like frustrating for me when I'm supposed to do it and in such a short notice. So for me, for example, it's more like to connect with my body, and that if something is important and it is present, so just to make focusing about it, and you know, like yeah, for me clearing the space, like it's never really clear. It's always somewhere, everything there. So I don't get it, in fact.
Okay. Good. I'm glad that you know yourself, but it's like that's not working for me.
Yeah.
So here's some general remarks about the kinds of neurodivergent experiences. I'm going to have kind of several of them, and so for each of them there is sort of the hyper, right? Too much going on. This is the hypo, right? It's like not enough, not insensitive. But then there's the repressed, right, where you're traumatically cut off from the hypersensitive. It's too much, so I'm blocking it out. And then there's also the conscious, where it's like when you compensate consciously for your hypo, like, oh, I don't instinctively read faces, right? So then I learned, you know, to look at the micro expressions and consciously become very good at it, but that's a compensation for a hypo. So keep this kind of taxonomy in mind as we go through the next few slides. And of course, you know, others. So interoception, proprioception, overwhelm, and stimming. right? I think anyone who's been to Peter Afford's talk was, interoception. It's about, hey, what is it like to feel hungry or thirsty or hot or cold or needing to urinate or defecate, Some people struggle with that, right? Some people don't know when they're hungry. And the first time they realize that something's off is like, oh, I'm dizzy, I'm about to faint, right? It's like, oh yeah, I haven't eaten in 12 hours, right? Again, it's a reverse engineering, right? And so that can be like an interoception deficit. And then there can be amplifications, like the feeling every hair on your skin. It can be overwhelming, it can be terrifying, and it can lead to the shutdown and suppression. And then there's the self-stimulation, flapping, and stimming, and grunting, and whistling, all sorts of things like that. They can be expressive, they can be calming, relieving, discharging, right? And then proprioception is about where your body is, right? It's like my hand is here and not there. Some people really struggle, like there are people who, if they close their eyes, they have no idea where their arms are, right? So, these are all things that can vary among people. So, keeping in mind that all of those things can be hypo, repressed or conscious or others. Like, as companions, I think the important thing is to recognize the kinds of distress that might be arising, right? In particular, keeping in mind how a trait can lead to a distress in the wrong circumstances. And, being really conscious to guide the focuser to being with like a narrow enough or a distant enough, being with if something is too intense. Help them recognize unsafe, uncontrollable, or overwhelming feelings. And, soothing, regulating guidance. And these are just general remarks, so I'm opening the floor here if anybody has experience with this. Thoughts?
Yeah, everyone can experience stress. There are certain toolkits that people have, resources to calm the system. One is under the category breath work, something as simple as just sensing the breathing, sensing the movement of the diaphragm, putting the hands on the belly, sensing contact to the ground, the chair, listening to background noises. So, and I don't know how that works for people on the spectrum. That I don't know, but it's hard to explore.
And there's probably no one way that it works, right? I think part of this whole consciousness raising is there are so many ways it might work or not work, and opening our own minds to like, oh, maybe it's not working how I thought it would. Other thoughts? Okay.
Question, just a normal process of the usual process,
Yeah,
my
sure.
process.
Yeah.
My experience with focusing partnership is just, the person being there already has a calming influence.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But maybe that's not true for everyone, and people get hyperactive, and maybe they need guidance there or suggestions on how to settle.
Maybe, yeah. I think that's the whole point. Opening yourself to the possibility that everything you thought was going to work might not work, or might work the opposite way. So, literalness, metaphors, and social communication, right? We could have an entire talk just on this, but autistic communication is often very precise. Sometimes it's quite binary. It's like when you're searching for a handle, it's like yes or no. And maybe some people might struggle with like, it's close to, it's somewhat. It's like, does this fit? No. As opposed to, does it fit? Well, kind of, but it could fit better. No. And so being aware that some people really, respond in that kind of very binary way, can allow us to have grace about, how this can be tricky to navigate, right? So they may need different kinds of prompts or guidance to get closer, precisely because these gray areas like somewhat may just not compute, right? And so again, sometimes, autistic people can be very literal. They might struggle with metaphor. We talked about that earlier. And sometimes the opposite. Sometimes they can be very expansive. The metaphors can be very, colorful or unexpected. There can be patterns and analogies and abstractions that may elude sort of, the obvious interpretations. And being able to attune to those kinds of very, fluid or ethereal metaphors can be really important. Go ahead.
But what I'm thinking is what we are doing with whoever,
Yeah.
I understand, is how can we help the other person to build in or to reinforce this internal feedback system?
Yeah.
What am I experiencing and how I am expressing it?
Yeah.
Does that make me, does it come close to a felt shift or is it meaningful?
Uh-huh.
So whatever it is, for me, how and where this art of how do we build this, or how can we, am I clear? How can I help the person?
Uh-huh.
It's always the same
Yeah.
question actually, to find out by himself or herself
Yeah.
what is the impact of what I'm just expressing for my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, can we rely on, or how can we, if this person says yes or no, or what, what can I say? I'm not you, no?
Right. Sometimes it's phrasing the questions in such a way that we can incrementally get a yes or no to, getting closer, like 20 questions, right? In English, it's like, is it bigger than a bread box, or 20 questions.
Yeah, it could be, from what I read in the first thing here, searching for a handle, I have this image that comes up, I guess it's from sound, or analyzing any kind of frequency or something.
Okay, yeah.
You can have something that has a large width,
Yeah.
like the width of the peak at half height,
Yeah.
and maybe for people on the spectrum, that's very narrow, so they really have to be close to that peak
Uh-huh.
to say yes or no.
Yeah.
So for such people, rather than just wait and say, well, give the person time, accept the no as a no,
Uh-huh.
and just rapid fire go through all, or at a higher frequency,
Uh-huh.
with suggestions, so
Uh-huh.
until the person says bingo.
Yeah. The point being, maybe there are many different strategies. That sounds like another possible strategy.
A question about what I'm realizing is, how would you introduce even the notion of a focusing practice
Uh-huh.
to somebody who is an autistic kid?
Uh-huh. That's a great question. Let's stew on that together for a little bit. But first, your question, or your
Lots of work with children
yeah.
and jump in, but this is the great question. We love focusing so much, and we're looking for something so powerful as a tool. We can see it, and so I'm both a whole body focuser and trained with children's focusing, so less so with verbal guides. And so when I'm working with autistic clients, whether they're children or adults, and just thinking through the repertoire, through the mind and into the body, but then if I switch to the other side, often with autistic spectrum, I'm balancing both. Some of them are very cognitive, and I feel out of my element then because we're going in with the words. So I just stay with them with their words until I feel that implicit, aha, okay, so that's, what do you mean by that? I might expand the meaning or I might work with it in a verbal way. And when somebody is non-verbal, like not really going into that way, as you're describing with your body, and just even the experience of life comes out, we all express ourselves as we are. So you can see me, like I'm in whole body focusing because I'm always moving, and I express things with my hands. So reflecting and tuning into the body and gesture and what they're doing, or inviting sensory experience and seeing, you know, okay, so this is where maybe it's getting caught up or tight. Like again, we experience so often anger in our shoulders or in our bellies, right? We're not digesting a piece of ours cut off. We have no idea when we're hungry.
Yeah.
So just bringing in the breath and that awareness to the core is kind of what I do. And I'm also trying to bring awareness to the whole so that it's often when there's something that's stuck, it either might be monochromatic, like so no color, or it might just be a sensation that's just like this. And somebody who's autistic, that distress level is so much higher, so I don't have to work so hard to get there. And the felt sense is really how to be present and tune into that so that we can shift it together in that space, like using me, so that's often what they tell me. Like, I can't do this on my own, but
Okay.
and then they bring it to me.
Okay.
Here's all the rest. Until they can learn this and have that confidence that they can actually, because with that hyper aspect, it's
Okay.
just too much clearly. But that's, I mean, I don't know. I'm only learning from each person that
Sure.
I encounter too.
Um,
So.
You know, that's the maxim. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one
Right.
autistic person, right? That's there's so much variability, and I hope that addresses your question to some extent. We'll come back if there's more.
But to follow up on what Serge said, how do you introduce focusing to a child with autism? How do you introduce focusing to anyone, to any
Yeah.
adult or children?
Yeah.
You know, any of these modalities.
To anybody.
To,
I can introduce it to anybody, and that's
I mean, I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner, and the way it's introduced to children is as playful way as possible.
right.
It doesn't even appear like a method. It's just
Okay.
play.
It's a process.
Excellent point. Yeah. So a few more comments. Rituals. Some people I've experienced have ways of accessing the felt sense, like an oracle. You know, they interrogate it and they wait for an answer, and then sometimes the answer comes like, you know, my body tilting in a certain way or something like that. So there may be rituals for how to communicate with the felt sense. Idiosyncratic vocabulary, just like you were just mentioning, right? Somebody was mentioning that might be intertwined with synesthesia. And then it may be unsafe feeling to actually say the thing that they want to say, the metaphor that they want to use, possibly because they've had that trauma of like, what are you talking about? You know, I don't understand your nonsense. You know, incongruous expression trauma. So we gotta be careful, right? We gotta enter the world, right? We gotta attune ourselves to the way they're going through their world, their process. Attune to those vocabularies, those rituals, those patterns. And respect the focuser's agency. Anything come up for you on top of that? Yeah?
Yeah, well, I just feel we're reminded to be, just to create an allowing space for whatever wants to be there,
Yeah.
and to be very receptive, so
Yeah.
that I'm curious
I'll keep going because I still have more content. I'll run out of time. Empathy. Again, we could have a whole presentation on this, but one of the sort of stereotypes, negative stereotypes, autistic people don't have empathy, right? It's the thing is there are many different kinds of empathy, and in fact there are many different taxonomies of kinds of empathy. So I'm just gonna go with one here that the difference between, do you need to close the window?
Is it okay?
Yeah.
You can close this one. I'd like to keep this one open if it's
Yeah, yeah.
okay. Just 'cause, those of you who've seen me around know that I wear a mask everywhere, and my wife said, you can't give your presentation wearing a mask. So this is like the first time in 6 years that I've been this many people without a mask on.
Wow.
So I keep the window open, keep some fresh air going. What was I saying? Cognitive empathy. So one, kind of empathy is like, I can, know what you're thinking. I, understand the thought process of your mind. One is emotional or affective empathy. It's like, I'm experiencing what you experience. Maybe I even feel what you're feeling physically. And then like compassionate empathy. It's like, I understand your predicament. I gotta help you. I gotta do something about you, about your situation. And the thing is, somebody can be high in one and low in the other, right? A lot of the stereotypes of, autistics who are insensitive, it's like, because they're struggling with cognitive empathy. But someone who might have low cognitive empathy might have really high affective empathy, might come into the room and be blasted by like, this person's sad. I feel sad too because I see you're sad, and so as a companion, it's important to just be aware of how the hypo and the hyper can show up along these dimensions, right, separately, and how it can show up as someone sounding insensitive or rude, or saying stuff out of context, or maybe overwhelmed, or maybe they feel powerless because they have this intense compassionate empathy, but they can't do anything about it. And this is just an article about the different types of empathy embedded in here. You can go read it. But what comes up for you when we talk about empathy? Because empathy shows up so much in attunement.
Take care of yourself too.
Take care of yourself too. Okay, great. So, anything else that comes up here? Go ahead, yeah.
Bidirectional.
I couldn't hear you.
Bidirectional.
Bidirectional, okay.
Yeah. Then the lack of understanding there in the person in the artistic space and the person not in the space, there is no real understanding,
Uh-huh.
right? Because I couldn't experience the other person's
Uh-huh.
experiencing. How do I have that real understanding without being experiencing it?
I mean, my hope is that this presentation
Yes.
helps give you
Yeah.
tools,
Yes.
right? Tools. And I'm going to talk a little bit about more tools at the end. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think to address the point you brought up, my experience has been that people can connect at different levels, like connect at the mental level. Like, you're interacting with someone, and then you can these two people that are so connected at the mental level, they can complete each other's sentences. They're like in the same wavelength. Like, they're both thinking the same thought before one of the two says it. Right? To me, that's would be a cognitive connection, and I've experienced that. And then there's the emotional connection, feeling with someone, or resonating with some of their life experiences. Yeah. This is the. I think you can have, these are distinct areas, yeah, that you can have connections there.
Anyway, I think the point is, by cultivating our own awareness of these experiences, it equips us with the tools to connect with someone else's experience more deeply, more richly. Yes?
I actually think it's a really good question because autism, my sense of the clients, sometimes, especially the ones that have more trauma, is that I can't necessarily, and I'll say this to them, I can't possibly have the empathy that you need for this because I can't possibly experience that. In listening to you, I wonder if I can just hold the space for you so that you do this, right? And I just own it that this is here. And I have experienced that that's tremendously relieving for them, that they don't, that I'm not seeing into them, that I'm not trying to do this. It almost frees them from all this traumatic experience of people trying to interpret their words, their expression, and things like that. So I hope that's
Yeah. More thoughts? So, now back to the paper, right? When I first started this project, I mean, this is my certification project for my certified focusing practitioner, or in 2021, when I started training, like, I couldn't find anything, basically, almost nothing, and there was this, like, question, can autistic people even focus? I don't know, I don't know. So I dug through the folio, and I found exactly one article, which is David Young's Touching What's Alive in volume 24, number 1. And it's a very interesting article. I strongly encourage you to go read it. But it talked about, David Young's experiences in a changes group, where this guy, Carl, just came in all, talking about wanting to run off and live in the woods, and that's the only thing he could talk about, right? And David Young just couldn't focus with him, couldn't get him to focus. And Marshall Rosenberg came into the changes group, and he helped Carl focus. And Marshall Rosenberg was very much like, what was he alienated from? What is it, when you reflect feeling, you get back feeling. When you reflect alienation, you get more alienation. This was a moment of consciousness raising for David Young. And I can't do justice to the article in 30 seconds, but his one of his major points was he noticed that a lot of these people that he was focusing with who were struggling were dissociated from their bodies. And after he learned about autism, he realized that a quarter of his entire caseload was autistic. And then the punchline of the article is, oh, my son and I are also autistic. So it was quite the revelation. And so this was about the only thing I could find, right? And then I kept looking. I was like, where can I look? And I decided to revisit Jenlin's focusing. And I got to chapter 2. And I found the story of Evelyn. Who remembers the story of Evelyn? The girl who was scared of college. She was dull-eyed, sad, extremely quiet. She had no feelings inside herself and had anxiety about it. And several therapists had kind of written her off as hopeless. But when she, worked with Jenlin, eventually she realized she could differentiate her feelings with the precision of a thinker. And she realized that she had to hide her true self away, the thing that was terribly wrong with her, whatever it was. And then at some point later on, her mother came from some talk, about exceptionally gifted children. It's like, oh, you know what? You were like that as a kid, right? And of course, we can't go back in time and diagnose anybody. And this was written in the 70s, right? The awareness was different. But given the overlap between what we now understand as autism and what was discussed as exceptionally gifted children back in the day, we can speculate, we can relate that Evelyn could very well have been an undiagnosed, masked, autistic woman struggling with this sort of feeling of something horribly wrong with me and not knowing what to do about it. So, you know, I thought that was really poignant. Okay. How does focusing appeal to me as an autistic person? You know? Well, first of all, I'm a software engineer by profession. I work at Google. And ironically, that was probably one of the reasons that it took till 45 for me to kind of go, hey, I think I'm actually autistic, because, you know, I grew up as a son of a professor who was kind of a math whiz in school, who got a PhD in mathematics and then became a software engineer. So talking about autism to me is kind of like explaining water to a fish, right? It's been suffused in it my whole life, right? So for me, I would say, you know, I have multisensory and kinetic fantasia with synesthesia. You know, the apple can be a very multisensory experience. I tend to use a lot of highly metaphorical language. I have I would say, atypically high pattern recognition. You know, it's important as a software engineer to be able to, you know, interact with these complex systems, look for subtle patterns, debug complex processes. I have what I would consider high cognitive, low affective, and high compassionate empathy. So I actually, this may be a little atypical. I mean, a lot of autistic people have low cognitive empathy and high affective empathy. But I find myself, and maybe it's a little traumatic that I'm cut off from from experiencing the feelings of others. It's too much, so I cut myself off. You know, historically, I've walled off my feelings and traumas with highly intellectualized, clinicalized responses. Sometimes I would kind of talk about my own, you know, disorders or whatever in the third person. Well, Francis is experiencing this, you know. I would, you know, Francis the clinician who was talking about Francis, who also happens to be the patient, right? And so one thing I found really powerful about focusing, right, is that focusing helps me, make contact with my bodily health, direct reference, using my highly active and sensory, sensitive, sensory perceptive neurobiological apparatus, right? It helps me use what I have to really make the contact, get underneath the highly intellectualized defenses and really, you know, make contact with what needs to shift. And so where do we go from here, right? My hope, my goal here is increased awareness of autistic traits and behaviors, accruing best practices and wisdom for how companions can attune, how focusing may appeal to some autistic people. You know, I would say sort of maybe even far from the possibility that the hypothesis that focusing is hard for autistic people. I posit that there are a lot of autistic people for whom focusing comes very naturally, that this is a very appealing, very resonant modality for them, and that they're quite good at it. So I think this is a dimension that is worth exploring. Go ahead.
One of my clients is a monk.
A monk, okay.
And he was diagnosed with being on the spectrum. But he really took to focusing, but it took me weeks to get to the point where he could actually identify what was going on. But once he took off of it, like, it was beautiful.
Great. Excellent. Thank you for sharing.
You're right, it was a monk.
It's a monk. He found his profession, right?
So have you found that focusing helps you reverse engineer feelings?
Yeah, it helped me get underneath what I thought I knew, what I thought I conceptualized. It helped me challenge my narratives. And I mean, you know, as someone with a lot of pattern recognition, I often have very elaborate stories, elaborate narratives about how things fit together and how my life is because of what happened in the past or how I am. And they can be rigid. These narratives have a lot of power. And so they both have a lot of power, and they're also can be very deeply rooted, right? So getting underneath them and looking for ways they can shift can be very challenging. And I found that focusing is a very powerful modality for me to help me access that kind of shift.
So what's underneath what you're saying is there has been a part of you that wanted to go underneath this pattern and in a way had a longing or yearning for focusing and you took to it. And
Sure.
I'm kind of curious about whether you have any kind of recollection or connection to describe that part of you that had some kind of a longing for that.
I was actually introduced to the sort of somatic, where is it in your body kind of stuff through EMDR, right? And in retrospect, I feel like the mechanism, the cookbook of EMDR incorporates a lot of focusing and in its substrate, I feel like I'm accessing the same altered space, right, when I do these modalities. But that was where I first...
So EMDR might have been easier for you as a transition?
Exactly. That was where I first encountered the possibility of accessing this space. And then when I found out about focusing, I was, oh, this is, to me, another way of accessing this space. And honestly, my sort of gruesome analogy is I find trauma to be like a scabbed over wound that is full of pus inside, and trauma healing has to be very gently kind of opening it up and draining a little bit and then patching it back up so it doesn't spill everywhere. And EMDR is a little bit like squeezing a pimple, it's like this pop, the pus can splatter all over the mirror or something. And focusing is a little bit more like, when you have some pus underneath your fingernail and you stick it in hot water and you let it soak for 20 minutes and then the pus kind of releases gently, but it doesn't like splatter. That's the difference I have with those two. Does that resonate?
Yes.
So EMDR is better for the acne of trauma.
Perhaps. Yeah. But yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, very much so.
I'm curious about your sensing with focusing and this idea of tapping into, the five sense and things since you came in with EMDR.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll even maybe have access to this.
Yeah.
but Did you ever, or do you still struggle with getting it right, like knowing that that's it, like the process itself that you're doing it? Like, is there any, do you have any recollection of when you're just starting into it?
No, not so much. I mean, if I did, it's no longer,
Right?
salient. I don't have a recollection of, am I doing this wrong? Am I doing it right? Because it was so powerful, whatever had to come, came. It was clear that was what had to come. And this was about the unlocking. This was about the releasing. For me, it was very cathartic. It was almost like a tube of toothpaste being squeezed out, And so, focusing is a little more gentle than that for me, because we get to control the depth a little more carefully. When you're doing the bilateral stuff, sometimes it just comes, it erupts, right? And once it comes like that, the action I have to take is like, okay, let's let it all come out. And it can be a lot. What I was going to say is there's some hot off the press research by Lola Leving and I forgot Watson's first name, but some academics in Canada. Capacity is required to engage in focusing, determining the role of focusing attitude, interoception, and symbolization. Very interesting paper. Quantitative research to try and put some numbers against what I'm talking about. And I was actually part of that study. So where do we go from here? Well, there are plenty of other neurodivergences, that I haven't talked about. There's severely deficient autobiographical memory, where people have no memory of feelings about events. Sometimes they can recall, you know, I was here at on this day, but I don't have any recollection if I'm happy or sad or whatever. There's Aurelia, where one can't replay sounds. There's endophagia, no inner monologue. There's a whole list of other things. And there was this book. I was really struggling about, hey, how am I going to do a workshop? How am I going to help people figure out what it's like to be alexithymic, or what it's like to, you know, be aphantasic. And this book just appeared by Sassy Smith called Unseen Minds, A Therapist's Guide to Multisensory Aphantasia and Invisible Cognitive Differences, which very precisely in hundreds of pages addressed exactly how therapists can increase their awareness of what it's like to have these various neurodivergences. So I highly recommend this book. And there's also a new book called Wired to Feel, Autism as a Condition of Sensory Surplus. I haven't actually finished it, but I got that quote and that sensory processing model stuff from here, so I figured I'd better quote it. And that's it. Thank you. And if you don't mind, let me turn the camera here so I can see all of you in my. How's that? Say hi. I so much appreciate all of your input and contributions. It's been so wonderful, and it's been a great learning experience for me. That's what we all came here for, to share. And these are the paper. There's an article I wrote as part of my certification project. The link is there. The slide link's here. Although I think now it's slightly old. I got to replace it because all the text was a little small.
Back to the Stone Age, right?
But yeah, back to the Stone Age, dinosaurs. And these are links to my website where I put them as free downloads. And this is where I harvest your email addresses, right? So with your permission. But thank you so much again for coming, and looking forward. And also my email address, of course, you can find me. I would love to continue this dialogue with anything you'd like to contribute, anything that comes up later for you. I feel like we just scratched the surface. There's so much to explore here. Yes?
Just, my feeling about where we go from here.
Yeah.
You mentioned other neurodivergences,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking of other modalities.
Yeah, okay.
Like focus, what can one combine focusing with?
Okay.
Maybe focusing in EMDR.
Yeah, sure.
There was this, at least in one article, probably multiple articles, Gene Gentleman referred to the usefulness or even the necessity of combining focusing with other things, other modalities.
Yeah.
Focusing can't do everything by itself, but in combination, it can be quite effective.
Absolutely.
I just thought that for me, like something between EMDR and focusing is something called transpotting.
Oh yeah, brain spotting. Yeah.
Brain spotting. It's
I think there's.
I do both, and
is here doing a workshop.
Yeah, I think the next workshop in like a half an hour is going to be on brain spotting.
But I did this, and in my experience, it was just in like EMDR, but with focusing, and
Yeah,
it is
that's brain
brain
spotting.
spotting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's really
I
cool.
learned brain spotting as well.
That's great.
There are soundtracks that you can buy, have one with brain spotting music, you put headphones on,
Yes.
and you hear the sound going from
Oh,
one side to the
interesting.
other, and your attention is shifting, yeah?
Okay.
And you go with this experience, and you say it aloud to your therapist, and because in EMDR you do it and then you stop, and you do it and you stop, and in brain spotting you have longer you are like for half an hour, for example, in this, and you have to like be with what is going on with you, and if you know focusing, you do it quite easily. I don't know if you don't know focusing how it goes, but it's interesting.
And I was just going to remark, there was this really great article, I think it was by Bohart and Greenberg, if I'm right, but it's comparison of like EMDR and like 4 other modalities, and one of them was focusing. And so it's a great summary article, and I think Jemlin contributed to the focusing chunk of the comparison
Yeah, and
article.
I've seen some of these articles, the typical approaches to compare methods as to which one is the better method. Where in fact, maybe people should be thinking about combining them.
Yeah. I don't think this article was particularly competitive, so it's worth a check out. I can send you a copy if you want. Okay, well, thank you so much again. It's been great. It's a pleasure.
Sorry, I'm working at the university and I'm looking for some articles about the focusing and the relevance in the research.
Okay.
And this article in the...
Yeah, Loving, and
Yes.
Watson. I can send it to you.
Yes, it would be...
You just, 1 second, let me just turn this off.